All right. Well, good morning, and again, thank you, excuse me, for the opportunity to be here with you today to discuss this fascinating and at the same time challenging prospect of engineering ourselves on a, I'm going to say, molecular level. Because the engineering, while we're going to focus on genetic and genomic engineering today, what we're really starting to understand is how it is so intimately intertwined with epigenetic and metabolomic and proteomic and all the other levels of molecular intervention. And so what I'm charged to do today is to give you a Catholic perspective on human genetic engineering and genomic medicine. And of course, as we do nowadays, one must begin with certain acknowledgments and caveats. My presentation is a Catholic perspective, certainly not the Catholic perspective, though I did intend that it be representative of Catholic reasoning on this issue, and since I've been involved in a lot of the discussions over the past 15 years or so, I think I can do a pretty decent job of that. Also, just to let you know that much of what I'm going to be talking about today was recently published in the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly, spring of last year, Human Genome Editing, a Catholic Perspective. So the timing was perfect. So I thank you for that. That made it easy. What I'd like to propose is that there are three areas where it is productive to really look at the Catholic perspective in terms of what it can contribute to the larger discussion. And those three areas, and the first one is why the Church attaches special significance to the primacy of human life. You can see that's in a different shade because I don't think that is something that we are going to have much disagreement about here in this group today. Although certainly in the larger public arena, there's a great deal of that. Whoops, sorry. Secondly, how this vision of the primacy of human life has developed in response to the advances in medical genetics. And this is something that I really want to talk about, not just in my presentation, but with all of you, because my argument is what has gone on recently in molecular biology has enormous ramifications for how we understand ourselves as human beings and therefore understand what human health means. And then third, of course, is, well then, going forward, what will it mean that we have this perspective that human life is of fundamental value and fundamental worth? And if that is the case, how does one go forward with these technologies in a way that would be substantively different than perhaps you might come up with from a different perspective, maybe a secular perspective or a utilitarian perspective. So that's what I'd like to focus on today. Now, of course, being a good Jesuit, well, I don't know, but that's true. But in any case, being a Jesuit, one of the things we're always interested in is making sure we have the proper definitions, right? So what are we talking about? Well, we all have been familiar with the term genetics, always have heard that. And of course now there's this more recent term, genomics. So what's the difference? Basically, I believe it is accurate to say when people use the term genetics, they're probably focusing on an individual gene or allele or a cascade of genes and alleles that are all intimately interrelated. When one talks genomics, one is talking the global genetic constitution of a cell or an organism, or maybe even more broadly, a species or a subspecies. So that's the difference. The genomics is the broader picture. It's the more complicated, it's the more comprehensive picture. Of course, as things always are in science, things continue to move along while we're all having these discussions. And so one of the big areas that's being discussed now is epigenetics and epigenomics. And the beauty of this area for us today is to remind us of the very tangential and tentative nature of our knowledge. Because when I was in school, there was Darwin, and then there was Lamarck, And Darwin had been proven right, and Lamarck was an idiot, because he thought that actually the behaviors of animals might be passed on to future generations. And of course now all the Lamarckians are coming out of the closet because they have now been proved correct, right? So epigenetics, or the way in which the genes are regulated, turned on and off, expressed, to what amount, when, all of that is in fact not only affected by the behaviors and the environmental influences in each of our lives, but those effects can be passed on to future generations, multiple generations from a single effect. And the one example we have that's currently probably most prominent in the literature is looking at the effects of Dutch and Belgian women in World War II, who, while pregnant, were starving. And you can go and look and see that their children and their children's children, and probably even the next generation, have different metabolic profiles than those children that were born either just before or just after those times, or born in different countries where the women weren't hungry. So what we now start to understand, and there's lots of animal model research that supports this, is the fact that yes, indeed, what happens to us in our lives can affect future generations in the way in which the genes are turned on and off. Now you say, well, that doesn't affect the genetic sequence. No, but what difference does it make if you have a particular genetic sequence if it's never expressed? Or you may have the same genetic sequence as somebody else, but it's expressed differently. So this is a huge area that I'm going to predict is going to just continue to explode in importance. Which of course means there'll be other new areas that'll come along, which we will have to pay attention to. And so here's one, for instance, epitranscriptomics. Yeah, of course, scientists just love to keep piling on the words. So actually this is fairly straightforward. You have a gene, the gene is expressed. Normally the DNA is read into messenger RNA, that's called transcription. If you look at the transcription across the entire cell or organism, that's transcriptomics. If you look at how transcriptomics is regulated by outside influences, that's epitranscriptomics. So this is now an area that's being investigated in research. And again, this is just the start. There'll be cycles upon cycles upon cycles. So just go back to your Ptolemaic universe and get ready for lots of epicycles in genetics, because that's where we're going. And so of course all of this information we are supposed to bring together and be able to describe genomic health. What does it mean to be healthy from this genomic perspective? Now of course, one thing, if we have a historical understanding, that should immediately come to mind is, whoa, how do we do that and not slide back into the past mistakes that we experienced in the eugenics movement, where people thought, even back then, that they had enough understanding to be able to say, this human being is good and should reproduce, and this human being should not. And the fact of the matter is, actually, you can go back and find quotations in Plato's writings where they were already talking about selecting males and females to mate so that you would have better progeny, and that the others should not be allowed to mate. So this idea has been around for quite a while. The question is now, again, as we ramp up the technology, how do we avoid slipping back into that idea that there are some good genomes and some bad genomes? And of course, again, since I'm giving this from the Catholic perspective, this is an area that is very important to the Catholic Church, because during the eugenics movement here in the United States in particular, as you can see from this quotation from Sharon Leon's book, the Catholic Church was very much engaged in pushing back against the eugenics movement. And not just pushing back from a theological perspective, but pushing back from a scientific perspective. It wasn't good science. But it was very popular. And it was very politically correct at the time. And so many scientists jumped on board, in spite of the fact that there wasn't the evidence to really support the claims that they were making. So as you can see, I mean, this was something that the Catholic Church got involved in when it was happening. Again, from that perspective of the primacy of human life, the value and worth of each human life, and who were we to judge. And that is an issue that I hope now to get into, to talk about who are we to judge one another. So of course the question to that is, if you're going to discuss genomic health, one of the things we need to understand is, what's health? Of course, I love asking that question to our medical students because, you know, I said, you all heard the word health before? And oh, yeah. Okay, fine, define it. Dead silence. Well, of course, the smart ones in the room who are sitting there get off their emails and then go Google it. What is health? And if you do that, you can find the World Health Organization definition of health. And you'll find that this definition has been around since the late 1940s, which means one of two things. Either it's a really good definition, or no one's been able to come up with anything better since then. So I really like this definition on one hand because it avoids a tautology. Often people will say, well, health is the absence of disease. Great, what's disease? It's the absence of health. Wonderful, that gets us really far. Okay, so they avoid that problem. The way they do it is by saying health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Okay, so that's wonderful. Everybody thinks, wow, that's really great. One question. How many of you here right now are in a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being? Okay, we're all sick. All right, so at least we're all sick. That's good. Well, problem is, of course, when in your life were you in a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being? So the reality is, we've never been healthy, we aren't healthy, and we never will be healthy, according to this definition. So why are we bothering? Let's just leave now and go drink. Okay. Oh, no, okay. So what we have to do is recognize this is what we aspire to. This is the goal. We're never going to get there, right? But what's hidden in this, what's embedded in there, is this idea that we understand what complete physical, mental, and social well-being would look like. And so what I'm going to raise today as a sort of provocative thought is, I don't think any of us has a clue what complete physical, mental, and social well-being would look like because of the very data that we have been gathering over the past 10 to 15 years. So now, the fascinating thing is, typical, right, of our world and science and technology advance, once we start getting new data, we start getting new ideas. Like, wow, we can do this on a personalized level. And of course, all of you are familiar now with personalized healthcare when Secretary Leavitt rolled it out in September of 2007. And as you heard in my introduction by Claretta, I was serving on the advisory board to the secretary at the time. And of course, they ran this by us first. And some of us were sitting in the room and they were, you know, all very excited. Wow, personalized medicine, the right treatment for the right person at the right time. Isn't that wonderful? And some of us looked at each other and so raised our hands and said, well, do you really want to go with that slogan? And they said, yeah, because this is what we're going to be able to deliver. And so I said, well, do you know of anybody who ever went to a doctor or a nurse and expected something other than this? Haven't people who've always gone to healthcare professionals thought this is what they were getting? Did anybody ever come to you, Bill, and say, please, give me the wrong treatment? Or, yeah. Or give me a treatment that would be perfect for me 20 years from now, or 20 years ago. Of course not. So our concern was, do you realize what you're saying? What you're saying is what we've done in healthcare up to this point has not been this. And now we have to admit that. And if we admit that it hasn't been this, going forward, we're either going to do one of two things. Promise something, which many of us don't think we're going to be able to deliver, and of course the empirical evidence now is you can't, because we went from personalized medicine to individualized medicine to precision medicine to now targeted medicine. So as you noticed, excuse me, we're getting away from the claim that we're going to truly personalize all this. The other is, if that's not the case, then what we have to tell people is you're never going to get the absolute precise right treatment for you at the precise moment. But that's, again, aspirational. That's where we want to go. And again, this isn't new. The question is, what problem is it we're trying to solve? And the problem is, we're different, right? Wow, that's what the genetic age has taught us. We're all different in ways we never even imagined. But we knew this already, right? So those of you who are clinicians in the room are well aware of the fact that you can take a group of people with the exact same diagnosis, the exact same prescribed treatment, and you'll get 4 different outcomes. Why is that? Because people are different. So the drug that works perfectly well, or at least reasonably well in one person, doesn't work so well. Oh, I got one, thank you. Yeah, thank you though. Doesn't work so well for others. And in fact, because we have this wonderful category, adverse drug reactions, in fact, that same drug will harm some people. So this is one of the goals. One of the goals is to say, can we do a better job just trying to figure out which drugs will help which people more than they'll harm them, and which drugs we should avoid for others. Pharmacogenomics. It's a big area right now. It's exploding. It's actually in clinical care. All right? So this is one area where we are starting to make some headway. The idea being, we know someone is sick. We know we want them to get them to better health. And we think we now have a better way of doing that. Of course, again, that presumes we know what sickness is and what health is. And this is where it's going to get really interesting. If you remember from yesterday, Bill showed us a list of genes that George Church had identified that he called protective. And these are genes that have been identified that seem to confer an added benefit of protection against certain diseases. All right? So that's a very interesting idea because, as we know, the human organism is rather complex. So if you tweak it in one area, you're also going to get effects somewhere else. All right, so here's a group of people. And you'll notice they all look really happy, right? But it's curious why they should look happy, because look at them. There's something seriously wrong. What is it? Well, it's either that the gentleman in the background is a giant, or they're all really short, which is in fact the case. These are people who live in remote villages in Ecuador who have a condition called Laron syndrome. And this researcher, Jaime, being the good man that he is, decided he was going to go up into those remote villages and study that community to find out why it was they had this terrible condition of being so short and what we might be able to do to make them healthier. And so, of course, Jaime spent 20 years or more working with these people, discovered what the cause was of their situation, and still couldn't get it published for a long period of time because researchers just wouldn't believe it. But finally, the evidence went out, and he got this article published in 2011 in Science Translational Medicine. And as you can see, it says this growth hormone receptor deficiency. So the gene, as it was identified yesterday in Bill's list, is called GH, the growth hormone receptor. Well, duh, of course it was the growth hormone receptor. Why? Because they're all short, right? And what does a growth hormone do? It helps you grow. But it needs a receptor for the hormone to go and attach to so it can trigger the cells to divide so you will grow. So it's not that they don't have growth hormone, It's they don't have the antenna to receive the signal. All right? And so they're short. But there's also a couple other things that go along with this particular condition. And you find those in the bottom of this little abstract. Not only are they short, but because they don't have the same growth profile we do, they don't get cancer at all. Wait a minute. How can that be? What is cancer? Cells growing out of control. Oh, so their condition adds an extra layer of control that prevents these malignant tumors from occurring. And in addition, they don't get type 2 diabetes. Why is that? Because the growth hormone receptor is part of the insulin receptor pathway also, and those pathways are linked. And so they have resistance to developing type 2 diabetes. Last time I checked, 2 of the largest healthcare challenges in the world in the 21st century are going to be cancer and type 2 diabetes. So, there it is. We've solved it. It's over. I have my Nobel Prize waiting for me. Why? Because all I have to do now, and I've done this, I've asked the medical students and the biomedical graduate students and other people in talks that I've given, I said, you come to my lab, and I will make sure that I genetically engineer your children to have Laron syndrome, so that you never have to worry about them getting cancer or type 2 diabetes. Great idea, right? None of them will take me up on it. Why? Because they don't want their children to be short? Is shortness a disease? Remember WHO definition? Physical, mental, and social well-being. The fascinating thing is, if you look at this population of mutations in animal models, when you do this kind of mutation, the animals that have been given this mutation, C. elegans, the roundworm, yeast, mice, whatever, tend to live longer than normal. So people have asked, how long do these people in Ecuador live in general? And the answer is, we really don't know. Because they don't die of the same things we die of. They don't die of cancer, metabolic disorder, cardiac events. They die of alcoholism, accidents, and other socially determined problems. Physical, mental, social well-being. They die because they're not accepted in society, the same as the rest of us. So are they healthier than we are? Are they sicker than we are? Who determines that? And how are we going to integrate information like this? Because there's going to be lots more of those quote unquote, supposedly protective alleles that are discovered. Who's sick and who's healthy? I would argue they could make a great case for saying they're much healthier than we are. And as one of the slides Bill showed yesterday, right, we should downsize the human species. They already did it. They're there. So where do we go from here? Now, interestingly, one of the things that also comes out of this impacts another of the issues that Bill raised yesterday. And that is the idea that we already do treat children who are projected to be short here in the United States. I think it was in the middle 2000s, about 2005 or something like that, the FDA approved treatment for children who are projected to be less than 5'3" for males and less than 5 feet tall for females. And what do we give them? Recombinant human growth hormone. Well, wait a minute. If these people have additional resistance to cancer and type 2 diabetes because the growth hormone doesn't work in their body, what happens when you overexpress growth hormone in a body that it does work in? So, of course, being good researchers, these people looked into that situation. And fascinating, this came from, as you can see, the Journal of Clinical Endocrinological Metabolism in 2015. So 4 years later, they published this. And here is the outcome. We know from these individuals with Laron syndrome that they do not develop diabetes because they lack the same balance that we have, the same regulatory balance we have in response to growth hormone. If you take a normal person and overexpress the growth hormone, what do you get? And you look down here, and a large post-marketing study noted a 6-fold increase in the development of type 2 diabetes with children who have been treated with recombinant human growth hormone. And this has only been like 10 years.
Was that when they were still children?
Yeah, no. This is 10 years post.
10 years later.
Right. So some are still quote unquote children, but some are in their late adolescence and maybe even early 20s. And the interesting part about this, once you stop the treatment, it doesn't resolve the risk. It doesn't go back to background. So here's the question, right? You are now a parent. Your child is projected to be short. You're going to treat your child? Give your child a 6-fold increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes later in life? How do you make that decision? To whom do you turn? Of course, the medical professionals. What do the medical professionals say? They say, we don't know. Of course they don't know. How are they supposed to make the decision? Why are we making this decision in the first place? Because society does not treat short people well. Why are we treating a social problem with a medical treatment that has a medical harm? Why? Because we can't get society to change. Fascinating. So what do you do as a healthcare professional? How do you deal with that? And this comes from the University of Maryland Health blog. And as you can see, the response was, we need more data. Well, we always say that in science. We always need more data. But what do you tell parents now? And just to let you know, I have a good friend and colleague who is a scientist who treated her children with recombinant human growth hormone before she knew about this effect. And she's a molecular biologist. So she's still kicking herself for not having anticipated this. But this is the reality that we are moving into. This is just one example of what I'm going to argue are going to be a multiplicity of examples of ways in which something works for some benefit and at the same time creates a harm. Some of those benefits will be medical, some of those benefits will be social, and harm's the same. So this is where we are. So now we have the challenge before us. Knowing what we now know, how do we go about delineating genomic good health? Who is healthy and who's going to decide who is healthy? And this is not new, really. I mean, when you stop and think about it. In Washington, D.C., we have a sister university across town called Gallaudet. Gallaudet is a university focused on people who are profoundly hard of hearing or deaf. Fascinating, within the deaf community itself, there is a huge debate going on. The debate being, is deafness a disease or a difference? Is it something that needs to be treated or something that in fact should be valued? Because now you do have parents asking for genetic selection of embryos to ensure that the children will be deaf. So it raises a really interesting question. To what end do we want to use these technologies, and what difference does it make? And this is a difficult question, but I think it's one that we have to at least look at. What's the difference between genetically engineering the child to be deaf and just puncturing the child's eardrums when it's born? Same result. One will throw you in jail. The other is an advance. How are we going to categorize these things? And this community is not the only one being torn apart by these particular issues, because now we have possibilities we never had before. So within the Down syndrome community, there's an interesting discussion going on, because there are some researchers now who say, wait a minute, we know the genetic cause of Down syndrome. It's an extra chromosome 21. We even think we've identified the genes on that extra 21 that being overexpressed are leading to the characteristics of Down syndrome. We know we now have a technology called RNA interference that we could use potentially to down-regulate the expression of those genes, bringing them back to quote-unquote normal. So, should we do that for fetuses that are identified as having Down syndrome? Of course, the other option is, as you know, we just get rid of those fetuses, which currently is the, I believe, I'm not sure if it's an official policy, but is the actual policy in Iceland and Denmark. Children with Down syndrome are not being born in Iceland and Denmark. Absolutely amazing, considering the fact that in the United States, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, a young man who is an actor in Hollywood testified before Congress because he has Down syndrome. And he said, my life is worth living. So if it's worth living, should we treat fetuses with Down syndrome so that they don't have Down syndrome? And it's fascinating, in the Down syndrome community itself, you get two responses. You get the parents that say, thank God, finally, something that might help my child be more like other children. But then you have the parents who say, well, why would I do that? My child is perfect, just the way he or she is. So which is it? And the reason I bring this up is because one of the things we know for sure, not many things we know for sure, but one of the things we know for sure is that everybody has deleterious alleles in their genome. There isn't a human being that's been born, and there isn't one going to be born, that doesn't have something that someone could say, this is not desirable, or this is not good. So if we use the criterion, well, we'll just let the parents decide on what basis, right? And we already know where that's led in China, India, and South Korea, where they did let the parents decide, and they decided they didn't want fetuses without a Y chromosome, because that's just not as good. So now you have areas of China where there are 130 males to every 100 females, which forced the Chinese government to say, we're not going to do that anymore. So obviously it's just not left up to the parents, because people may make some decisions, even unknowingly, that have horrible social consequences. And as I mentioned, this affects everybody. And so we need to be upfront about that. So some of you have known me for quite some time, and I realize now the fires have gone out. But there was a time when I had flaming red hair. And that, of course, is an indication that I, too, yes, am a mutant. But like all mutants, I have both superpowers and some susceptibilities that other people don't have, right? So one of my areas of susceptibility is, you see this beautiful, lovely day we have here today? This is what I consider to be ideal, heavily clouded. Why? Because where my people come from, this is what it looks like all the time. It's called Ireland and Scotland, right? We don't have to worry about that big bright thing in the sky, because we don't ever have to see it. Problem is, when it shows up, I can make a melanoma just by thinking about it. So this is a problem. And in fact, if you had seen me about 3 weeks ago, you would have seen the wonderful results of my dermatologist burning my face off yet once again to keep that from happening. However, I have an advantage, because we keep talking about what we might do to our climate. And let's say we do destroy our climate and we cloud over the earth and we don't ever see the sun again. All you are going to disappear, but my people will remain. Because we can make vitamin D by starlight. So we don't need the sun. Who's healthy? Who's sick? Who decides? How are we going to engineer ourselves to improve? Improve for what? Improve according to whose criteria or whose value? How does that happen? Especially since, as we now heard, even for genomic medicine, most of health is socially determined. One of the things I like to tell people is, okay, soon we're going to have whole genome sequencing for everybody. And so you're going to go in to see your doctor or nurse, and you're going to get the results. And the results are going to be, I have good news and I have bad news. And you're going to say, well, you know, being a typical human being, give me the bad news first, save the good news, right? And the bad news is, ice cream will kill you. And you're like, oh, I knew it. Oh, but I love ice cream. Oh, well, what's the good news? You're one of those lucky people. You could chain smoke for the rest of your life, and you're never going to die of lung cancer. And you go, that's the good news? I hate smoke. I can't even be in a room where someone smoked a month ago, right? So there it is. That's your future. But you don't like it. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to change your whole life to fit your genetic profile? We can't even get people to change their whole lives to fit their religious convictions, much less their genetic profiles. So how's that going to work? So how are we going to go forward with this information? And how are we going to talk about your genetic profile in terms of who you are as a human being and what it means to be a human being and what the goals are for human beings? How are we going to look at pushing genetic editing versus societal change? And what do we do with people who are deaf or have Down syndrome or red hair? Is each person a unique expression of God's creative power in our midst, as we may interpret it? Or is each person just another chaotic event that we have the responsibility to decide, we being those who happen to be in power, whether or not they're worth it? And oh, by the way, every time someone has ever brought that up and said these people are worth it and these people are not worth it, notice, those people making the pronouncements are always in the I'm worth it category. What does that say? So how, even if we decide that each and every human being is of value, of fundamental worth, to be loved and cherished as they are, how then do we fit in a need for health care and this genetic information and talk about making each person's life even healthier or more fulfilling? How do we do that? Obviously, a lot of that is going to come out of whatever concepts of health and human nature we have. Whatever we think is the good, how we conceive of that good, and how we think it would be legitimate to try to work toward that good. So what we have to ask ourselves is, what informs those concepts? Where do they come from? Right? Well, and as all of us know, they come from a lot of different places, right? We have scientific information, obviously we want to have that. We have our philosophical interpretations and analysis, we have our theological perspectives, we have our cultural perspectives, which very much influence us, and you have your family and friends. One of the things that you could always make students squirm is to let them know that most of what they really think and hold dear came from their parents. They haven't quite got to the point yet where they're comfortable with that, you know. So this is fascinating. Do we really stop and look and see where all this information is and ask, how do we pull all this together? How do we integrate this? Especially, how do we integrate this incredibly challenging, new, and exciting information from genetics and genomics into our bigger worldview and understanding of ourselves? So let's look at what we use to integrate those things. Are our methods of understanding and integration adequate for our current age? Are we using static concepts, which are comfortable to us because they remain the same? My idea of what it means to be human is the same as my parents' idea, is the same as my grandparents' idea. Is that still legitimate? Is that still best? Do I need to somehow update my concepts? Because, again, one of the few things we know for sure, we will change. Change is inevitable. That is what it means to be a contingent being. We change. Nothing is static. But then, on the other hand, you could say, well, okay, fine, let's just go with the scientific information. We'll just use that. And what does that get us? It gets us doctors that sit there and say to their patients, or the parents of the children, we don't know what to do. Because science doesn't tell us that. Science just gives us information about the empirical reality around us. We have to decide what to do with that. So I always love the scientists that get up and say, really, we just should stick to what the science tells us. And I say, well, really, what does the science tell us? And then as soon as they start spouting, I say, no, not what you, the scientist, tell us. Just the science. I don't want your interpretive heuristic framework, because that's not science. That's just your particular interpretation. So science doesn't tell us nearly enough. So oftentimes people will kind of fall into this, and I don't think they necessarily do it intentionally. I think because dualism, I think, has pretty much been hammered to death. But they still fall back into that, well, there's what happens to your body, but that's not the same as your person. Really. So I always use the paraphrase of Samuel Johnson, and I go up and I kick the person in the shin. And I say, thus I refute you. Because I guarantee you they're not going to be happy about the fact that I kicked them in the shin. Right? So I've influenced their person by influencing their body. And I can influence their body by influencing their person. So I like to do this to the medical students too, because we Jesuits, are into really torturing people. Get a bunch of students in the room and you say to them at the beginning of the class, I'm sorry this wasn't in the syllabus, but by the way, there's going to be a quiz at the end of the class, and it's going to be on everything we've talked about up to today, and it's going to be half your grade. Well, I mean, you can imagine what the responses are. And then you just stop and say, whoa, okay, stop. So person and body are not intimately intertwined? I said, did I touch any of you? Did I put something in your food, in your water, in the air? No, all I said were some words. And I changed your entire endocrine profile. Your cortisol just shot up, right? Your anxiety levels went nuts. Suddenly you were much more attentive than you had been 5 minutes before, and all I did was use some words, right? They're not true, but it didn't matter, right? So we've got to have a system that not only is dynamic, but it's integrative, that it understands that all of this comes together. Now, of course, the criticism of that approach, which often comes up, is you can't do that. It's just too complicated. So it's like I was mentioning yesterday, the people who say, no, you can't look around the bend to decide where we're going to be, because it's too complicated. You just got to focus on the little incremental stuff that we can make decisions about now. Really? Why? Right? So, since when is complicated something that rules out continued analysis and reflection? Especially in the age of big data, right? So, I mean, they're the ones embracing complexity. So let's embrace it, but let's embrace it in a truly comprehensive way. And let's look at how we might move forward into doing this. Now, again, taking this all from a Catholic perspective, and people will say to me, well, I mean, that's not what the Catholic Church says, is it? Gee, I don't know. Do you read anything other than what you see in the paper? So here would be, for instance, the address Pope Francis gave to the Italian Society of Surgical Oncology a few years ago. And of course, as we know, this is what we're pushing in medicine, integral treatment, right? Not just looking at your blood pressure, not just looking at your lab results, but asking you, how are things in your life? What are your goals, your hopes, and your dreams? right? What's your diet like? What's your exercise like? All of these things have to be pulled together. Why? Because health, as we heard again from the World Health Organization, is more than just your physical and even your mental. It's also your social well-being. And so it's more than technical care. You treat the whole human being, which means you treat the human being's relationships also. So it's psychological, social, and spiritual. That's the approach the Catholic Church takes, and I think that's the approach all of us take. That is who we are, and so that's how we should treat people. So, looking at this, people will say, well, where's the church then on, genetic technologies and how we're going to integrate them? Because, of course, the church is against everything, right? Any kind of technological, scientific progress we're against. Because, again, that's how it's often portrayed in the press. And again, I am not against the press at all, but I think we do have to recognize the fact that they have to sell papers or airtime to continue to be the press. And so the more controversial it is and all, of course, the better it is for them. So, if you look at the documentation that comes out of the Catholic Church, and I'll pick in particular Dignitatis Personae, because that is the one that most specifically focuses on these bioethics questions, you can see that two conclusions that come out, which are applicable to this, and I think also surprising to some people. First of all, of course, in the old sort of grid that we had for stem cell research, there was somatic and germline, there was therapeutic and enhancement. Well, I and others have argued, I really don't think there's a therapeutic enhancement line that you can draw anymore. There's a therapeutic enhancement spectrum, and there's one end and there's the other, but it's really gray in the middle. I'm going to argue now that with our greater understanding of epigenetics and epigenomics, this idea of somatic and germline also is going to start to blur a little bit. Now, the only way in which we can limit the germline thing is by saying, well, of course, we know the gametes begin to develop even early on in the development of the fetus. So if you're going to have epigenetic effects on the next generation, it's going to be probably most significant in that early developmental period. All right, that's fine. However, we also know that there's a lot of interaction that goes on in the womb as the fetus is developing. So I'm going to argue that there'll probably be epigenetic effects there also. So that will be something that we have to take a look at. If that's the case, then the germline thing might also get a little less clear. But in any case, from the Catholic perspective, one could make an argument that would be legitimate for germline genetic engineering. And it was an example I gave to Bill last night when we were talking about your question, Gil. So, all right, put Leishmanians aside. Let's talk sickle cell anemia, right? Something that presumably will be relatively treatable in the near future. And take a country, I'm just going to pick Ethiopia, for instance. Would it be legitimate for a country like Ethiopia to say, yes, we could treat every individual born that's identified having sickle cell anemia with this particular treatment, but that would cost us X. And if we use this germline genetic intervention, which we know to the best of our ability and comfortable certainty is not only safe but predictable, would it be a public health decision that one could make to choose the germline intervention over the somatic cell intervention, and then therefore be justified on those grounds, regardless, not regardless, but taking into consideration all those other questions that you raised about just germline versus somatic interventions, which I would say still we're going to have to worry about that area being blurred. So, again, the idea here is there is a reasoning process in place that has been developed over a couple thousand years. We can apply that process to this problem, just like we apply it to every other problem that comes along, every other challenge. How do we use genetics to change human nature, right, in a way that we determine through reflection and reasoning to be improving health and avoiding the problems of the eugenics, where you claim to say some person is better than another person, just genetically or genomically, right? How do we do that? That's the challenge. But that's what needs to be embraced. Don't run away from it. We don't say, no, don't use it. But how do we go about using it well? And we're not alone in this. I mean, we all know, and Bill mentioned this yesterday too, right? There's been a variety of groups that have come forward. This is just one of them, and you can look at the list, and it's a very prestigious list in terms of people who've been involved in the bioethics and biomedical arena for quite some time. And this was their article in April of 2015 in Science, right? What's a prudent path forward? All right, and I myself did the highlight of the color here just to point out that they say we need to engage the public. We need to be transparent. We need to have some communication. And initiating these fascinating and challenging discussions will now optimize the decisions society will make. Not the scientists will make, not scientific organizations will make, society will make. And this will optimize, all right? I'm not adverse to that. Of course, is that what they're doing? No, of course not. That's not what they're doing. They're going right ahead. Why? Because we can't wait. We've got to move, right? So if we don't do it, the Chinese will do it. Well, they are doing it, right? But I believe the Chinese were at the meeting in December that they had talking about how we were going to do all this. And the fascinating thing that came out of that meeting was people saying, well, yeah, I mean, when we get to germline and when we get to issues of changing human beings that are going to be born, right, and going to be children, yeah, we should talk to people. But in the meantime, research should go forward. Why? Where? To what end? What's the goal? Right? Who's deciding this? Well, the scientists. Why? Because we want to do it. Well, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I don't disagree with that at all. Question is, does that optimize the decisions society is making? No, not even according to their own formula. So how then are we going to do this? Right? Because as we see, as I mentioned and Bill mentioned, you can all find this out. Other groups are going to go forward, right? And I can understand from the Chinese colleagues I talked to, they will say, we are not worried about your Western hang-ups. You know, you guys have all these sort of Western values and stuff. It's just getting in the way. You know, this is progress. So, okay, define progress for me, right? You know, of course, if progress doesn't matter what happens to millions of people in your country, you know, okay, then that's a whole different kind of idea of what progress means, and then we have to get back to that conversation. So how do we take all of this and look how we should go forward? Well, I think we have to learn from our past mistakes, that's for sure. And I've had some engagement with the plant genetics community, with the agricultural biotech companies, and just again for transparency's sake, I have done some consulting with DuPont and their seed company, Pioneer. And it's fascinating to see they really do not want to make the same mistakes that happened with genetically modified organisms and GMO foods and all that. Now, of course, one of the ways they might want to get around that is by saying, well, this technological intervention isn't the same as that was, and it's different in substantive ways. And it is, and I can see that, but does that solve the problem? Or do you need to really engage with those communities that have issues about genetically modified organisms and have some discussions and really find out what the concerns are and how you might be able to address them together? Right? Are we going to just, again, as Bill mentioned yesterday, some people saying, oh, we don't have to worry about embryo research and abortion. Those have been resolved. Really? According to whom? So I was just in a other project, and granted, there were only, out of maybe 24 people in the room, 2 that were sort of what we considered pro-life. And we're looking at what are we going to do with prenatal genetic diagnosis. And of course, the idea was, oh, well, we're just going to go ahead with this, and this is going to be fine, and people can use this to make decisions, like abort whatever. And I said, okay, fine. Let's just set aside all the philosophical, theological, scientific. Let's just look at this socially. You're telling me that this group, which is trying to be so reflective and reasonable and all, is going to put out a recommendation that they want the government to institute, which at the beginning pretty much alienates half the population of the United States. And I don't care which surveys you want, because you can find them, is it 30-70 pro-choice, pro-life, or is it the opposite or whatever. So they run the spectrum. But so let's just divide it 50-50. You're seriously going to put out, as a reflective organization, recommendations that from the start are not acceptable to half the population of the United States. What kind of reflection is that? Right? I mean, would we do that? Would we say, right, here's the recommendation, and all of the rest of you, tough. We don't care. You're on your own. Don't we always try to say, look, okay, it's a women's health issue. Women need better health care, prenatal health care. Don't you always try to at least address these other things and add these things in? So, this is the question. How do we learn from our past mistakes? How do we get past these divides? Not by giving up our values, not by giving up our goals and our goods, but by engaging others and bringing everybody past the current problems. So we had Jesse Gelsinger. You're all familiar with the Jesse Gelsinger case and what came out of that. And the idea again is, how do you do clinical research in a way such that there are going to be problems, right? There's no clinical research program I've ever seen that didn't have issues it had to address, adverse effects and reactions. They're going to be there. Do you address that by sort of trying to hide that under a bushel basket? Do you address that by saying, well, we did all this animal research and, well, that wasn't supposed to happen? Well, we knew it was going to happen. Eventually. The question is, did you do enough communication and engagement ahead of time to let people know? If we're going to acknowledge that there's going to be errors and tragedies, how do you prepare for that? You let people know. Right? You get a point where they trust you and your values and your goods and your goals. And it's not easy. And I have a wonderful research assistant, Samantha Wu, and she and I have done some blogs on this idea of how does one get past these polarizing divides, especially where the groups don't trust one another, right? And of course, everybody talks about public engagement, but when you look at it, public engagement is also not a one and done practice. It's not a single cookie cutter sort of approach. There are a lot of different ways you can do it, and some ways are going to be better in some circumstances and other ways in other circumstances. But you got to give it the time, and you got to give it the effort and the patience. And as you can see, I mean, one of the things is, especially in the area of emerging biotechnologies, much depends upon what the preliminary sort of assumptions and presumptions are going in, and who's making those. And so oftentimes, it's funny, when you do public engagement, you'll see the scientists and the researchers saying, yeah, but they won't, if we do it this way, the people will not come out thinking the way we want them to think. And I said, okay, so are we doing public engagement or public indoctrination? Because I believe that what you just described is called indoctrination. All right, so how do you do public engagement? We even have to go in acknowledging people may not end up agreeing with us. Okay, what's new, right? But question is, can we go into the public arena and make good, rigorous, robust, rational arguments that nobody can say are not for real? They can dismiss them. They can just say, I don't like that. That's not what I want. But that's fine. Because then you say, fine, in the public arena, are we going to just go with what everybody wants? Because we know where that leads. Or are we actually going to say what we say we're going to do in the public arena, and that is get somewhere we can actually reason our way to argue that this is something that is of greatest benefit for the greatest number, for the greatest good, and we'll use the utilitarian maxim. I'm fine with that, because ultimately, that's what we get. So if they want to go that way, fine, let's go that way, because I don't think their arguments sustain that. And it's not something, again, that's just our group or a few groups saying, population health in vulnerable populations, you have to have trusted agency. You have to have people there that people trust, right? I go to this person, I am going to get the best possible care for me now, which we could say is the right treatment for the right person at the right time, even though it's not going to be perfect. So this is an opportunity for all of us. So when we look at, from a Catholic perspective, what's good genomic healthcare? Well, again, since we acknowledge now that much of health is socially determined, we have to understand the social determinations of different people in different groups. We have to engage them. We have to go to where they are, go in their door. And if we do this, and again, you're going to hear this, and I've heard this a lot, this will slow down the research. Yeah, goody. What's the problem with slowing down the research? Well, yeah, how are we going to, care for all those patients who need it right now? Well, again, wait, let's stop. Didn't we just agree that much of healthcare is socially determined? So don't you think people would feel better and be actually healthier because they feel better if they feel heard and engaged rather than herded and pushed into certain? Isn't that what makes people feel better when they're in a trusted relationship? Even if it doesn't mean they're going to have all the technological options that might have been, but instead they may actually feel like the options that are being chosen, they had some input in. So if indeed the goal truly is the best health care for these people, then this is the way to go. And in fact, just to give you an example of what I think is a really hopeful development, my understanding is after the Ebola crisis, particularly in Liberia, members of the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, the UN, US State Department and all recognized the fact that they could have done a better job. And one of the key things that prevented them from doing that better job is they wouldn't listen to the healthcare workers who had been on the ground for decades. And by that I mean the nuns, whose communities had been there supplying healthcare to those people for decades. They were the trusted agency. They were the knowledgeable people about public engagement. And now, because of that, we actually had a meeting at the Vatican talking about how these organizations, the World Health Organization and Doctors Without Borders and the UN and the US State Department actually supported this, partially funded it. How do they engage with faith-based organizations? Faith-based organizations. Oh my God, they're engaging with like religious people? How can you do that? Aren't they like all crazy? I mean, after all, why would they be there for 40 years if they're not crazy? Right? Sister Barbara Brilliant, who's been there for 40 years, is from Maine. She's been living in Liberia, right? So, I don't think those are close ecosystems. But she's there because that's what she's given her life to. And the people there know that, and they trust her. They don't know these other people coming in dressed in outfits, bringing in all their equipment and everything, are doing whatever. So I think the groups are finally starting to recognize there's real good to be achieved here, real good. And this is a model, we think, that could be expanded to any part of medicine, but including genomic medicine. So I'm working on some projects in that too, and I'll be glad to talk to you about that, and I thank you so much for your attention and look forward to your questions and your comments. Thank you.